Hey everyone, Dan back again, and welcome to the final video in my How to Play the Tomb Raider collectible card game series. In the previous video we talked about actually playing the full game and what the sequence of play looks like. In this video we're just going to talk about the changes added with the Slippery When Wet expansion. So there was actually a second expansion called Big Guns, but as far as I'm aware that didn't include any new mechanics, so we'll just be focusing on the changes with Slippery When Wet. So the Slippery When Wet expansion included some new mechanics. Specifically we're going to be talking about the wet and dry mechanic, as well as air supply and also companion cards. With this expansion, some cards now specify if they are wet or dry. So you can see Neptune's Sanctum is a wet location. If a card doesn't specify if it is wet or wet/dry, then it is a dry location. There are some things which you need to know about the wet locations which are different to the dry locations, and there are some ways that you can drain locations to make them dry and flood locations that are dry to make them wet. So let's talk about locations. So as mentioned, some locations now stipulate that they are wet, and you will need to use air supply when going through these locations, and we'll talk about air supply in a little bit. There are some cards that you can use to change a location to make it wet or dry. So if we have a look at Geyser Eruption, it says here this location becomes a wet location. So this would be like a geyser which explodes and floods the area, making it a wet location if it was dry before. Similarly, this card here, Air Pocket, adds a save point to a non-special wet location, and then it becomes a dry location. So you can change the locations, and those changes are generally permanent. It's very, very rare that you're able to change something back to what it was before. So some cards now can only be used in certain scenarios. So for example, here we have Strong Currents and Gigantic Eel, and these cards can only be used at wet locations. Obviously, you couldn't have a gigantic underwater eel in a dry location. So if you are playing solo, you wouldn't be able to use these obstacles on your location. You would have to draw another one. Similarly, in a multiplayer game, you cannot play these on an opponent's dry location. Some items can also only be used at wet locations. So the diving flippers give +2 to the result of each move test while at a wet location. So obviously, they don't do anything for you when you're not at a wet location. Some items actually say wet/dry, so they can be played in either location. For example, the Frogman here. There's also some wet and dry weapons. So the Shark Knife can only be used in, can be used in wet and dry locations. Magnum pistols don't specify whether they are wet or dry, so they are considered to be dry and therefore cannot be used in wet locations. Obviously, because you can't shoot guns underwater. I mean, not these ones. We need to talk about air supply. So when you're in a wet location, you will reduce your air supply by 1. If your air supply goes to 0, then you die. Everyone starts with a maximum air supply value of 6, and your air supply can increase above 6 if you have some cards that let you do so. If you find a card that says you can fill your air supply, then you would put it back to 6. So for example, the air tank card here says fill your air supply, so you would put your air supply back to 6 from whatever value it was. So your air supply is reduced when you enter a wet location, you would reduce it by 1. When you make a test at a wet location, you would reduce it by 1. But when you re-enter a dry location, die or reset, you can refill your air supply to maximum. So what I would probably recommend for air supply is to use a D6 die to indicate where you are. So you can start on 6, and then when you reduce 1, you can put it down to 5. It just makes it easier to keep a track. The final thing added in Slippery When Wet were the companion cards. So I have the Parrot Companion here. These can only be used in dry locations, or specifically can only be found in dry locations when completing a search, and they are added to your unsaved item discoveries. So you can never save the parrot, sadly. If you die, the parrot flies off, I guess. And this one says add +2 to the result of all think tests. So it's a pretty useful bird. So those are the changes in Slippery When Wet. It makes it a little bit interesting. It's not like massively different, but I think that the wet and dry location stuff is interesting, so I'd be super interested in giving it a go. So there we are. That is the end of my How to Play the Tomb Raider card game playlist. I hope you found this useful, but please give me any notes and comments that you have below. I'd be really interested to hear from people who are still playing the game. Thank you very much for sticking with me, and I'll catch you on another video soon. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd be interested in more videos like this, please click the subscribe button down below and give me a thumbs up to let me know that you enjoyed this video.